The ground is literally vanishing beneath people's feet in towns across the world. We are about to explore 24 crumbling towns built on the very edge of instability, from cities sinking into the sea to villages perched on eroding cliffs. By the end of this journey, you will understand the powerful geological forces shaping their fate and the profound human stories of resilience in the face of constant peril. Why would entire communities choose to anchor their lives to such precarious places? And what happens when the land itself turns against them? What does it truly mean to build a home knowing it could be gone tomorrow? The very ground beneath these towns is in a state of constant, invisible negotiation. To be on the edge means living with a fundamental truth that most of us take for granted: the stability of the earth itself is a temporary condition. This instability is not one single force but a collection of powerful geological processes that can act slowly over generations or strike with terrifying speed. Landslides occur when gravity finally overcomes the friction holding a slope together, often triggered by heavy rain or earthquakes, sending entire hillsides crashing down. Erosion is a more patient adversary, where wind and water gradually wear away coastlines and riverbanks, inch by precious inch. Then there are sinkholes, sudden collapses into hidden caverns dissolved by groundwater or left behind by forgotten mines, creating literal voids where solid ground once stood. And underpinning it all is seismic activity, the sudden shifting of tectonic plates that can liquefy soil and topple buildings in moments. The danger for these communities exists on a spectrum, from the creeping decay that allows a house to crack over decades to the catastrophic collapse that can erase a neighborhood in minutes. Understanding this vocabulary of risk, from the relentless pull of gravity to the hidden weaknesses in the earth, is essential to appreciating the specific and profound challenges faced by the 24 towns we are about to discover. These powerful forces of nature beg a fundamental question: why would anyone, let alone an entire community, choose to build a life on such treacherous ground? The answer is rarely simple and almost never born from a desire for danger. Instead, the precipice was often chosen as the lesser of two evils, a calculated risk weighed against even greater threats. For many, the high ground offered the ultimate advantage: defense. A fortress city perched on a crumbling cliff was still far safer than a vulnerable village on the open plain, protected from invaders by the very geography that threatened to consume it. Others were drawn by the promise of immense resources, chasing veins of gold, coal, or other precious minerals deep into unstable mountains, where the risk of a cave-in was overshadowed by the dream of prosperity. Some communities sought not riches or security, but simply peace, finding refuge from persecution or conflict in remote, difficult-to-reach locations where the land itself was their primary adversary. In each case, the edge of instability was also viewed as the edge of opportunity. It was a line drawn between survival and extinction, between poverty and wealth, between oppression and freedom. The crumbling ground was a price they were willing to pay, a dangerous partner in a fragile pact for a chance at a better life. This theme of desperate calculation connects settlements across continents and centuries, reminding us that human ambition has always been a powerful geological force in its own right. High on the sun-baked cliffs of Colorado, the stone cities of Mesa Verde cling to the rock, a testament to human ingenuity in the face of gravity. The ancestral pueblones did not merely build on the edge, they built within it, carving entire communities into vast natural alcoves high above the canyon floors. For them, the overhanging sandstone cliffs offered a perfect shelter, a roof that protected them from sun and snow while concealing their homes from view. This strategic choice provided incredible defense and comfort, but it came with a constant, looming threat. The very rock that shielded them could, without warning, break away. The danger of rockfall was an ever-present part of life, a trade-off for the security the cliffs provided. Their architecture reveals a deep understanding of this fragile balance. They constructed multi-story towers and intricate kivas, or ceremonial rooms, with a precision that maximized space without undermining the stability of the canyon walls. They used mortar made from local materials, allowing their buildings to sway slightly during the minor tremors that are common in the region, a primitive but effective form of seismic resilience. Every stone was placed with intention, creating a settlement that was not just on the cliff, but of the cliff, an organic extension of the rock face itself. For centuries, this symbiotic relationship worked, allowing a sophisticated culture to thrive in this vertical world. Today, the silence that hangs over these dwellings is profound. The threat, however, has not faded with time. The same geological processes of erosion and freeze, thaw cycles that shaped the alcoves now work to dismantle them. A single crack, widened by ice over countless winters, can lead to a slab of rock weighing thousands of tons crashing down onto the ancient plazas below. Modern preservationists face a monumental task: how to protect these irreplaceable structures without altering their essential character. They install nearly invisible steel bolts to stabilize fissures and monitor the slightest shifts in the rock with laser precision. Their work is a delicate dance, a race against the inevitable forces that first created this precarious paradise and now seek to reclaim it. The cliff dwellings stand as a powerful reminder that even the most brilliant adaptations to a dangerous environment are only ever a temporary stay against the relentless pull of the earth. Yet even the most ingenious cliffside dwellings face a slow and predictable adversary, unlike the complex and multi-layered crisis confronting a city that is synonymous with water itself. Venice is a place where the very streets are liquid, a breathtaking work of art slowly dissolving into its own reflection. The threat here is not a single cliff face giving way, but a relentless, three-pronged assault from below, from the sides, and from above. First, there is subsidence, the gradual sinking of the city's foundation. For centuries, Venice has been settling into the soft mud of its lagoon, a natural process worsened dramatically in the 20th century by industries pumping vast quantities of groundwater from beneath the city, literally causing it to shrink. Then there is acqua alta, the high water. These seasonal floods, driven by strong sirocco winds and high tides, are becoming more frequent and severe, regularly submerging St. Mark's Square under feet of water. But amplifying both of these ancient problems is the modern specter of global sea level rise, which is steadily raising the baseline of the entire Mediterranean Sea. The romantic image of a gondola gliding past historic palaces masks a desperate, multi-billion-dollar engineering battle. The most famous weapon in this fight is the Mose project, a system of 78 giant mobile gates installed at the 3 inlets to the Venetian lagoon. When a high tide is predicted, these hollow gates fill with air, rise on hinges from the seabed, and form a temporary barrier against the invading sea. It is a technological marvel, but also a subject of intense debate, plagued by delays, cost overruns, and concerns about its long-term effectiveness against the accelerating pace of climate change. Beyond this massive barrier, there is a quieter, constant effort to save the city stone by stone. Buildings are being injected with grout to stabilize their foundations, and waterproof barriers are being installed at the base of historic structures. The question hanging over every effort is not just one of engineering, but of philosophy. Can Venice, a city whose identity is inseparable from the water, be saved by walling itself off from that very element? Or is it fighting a losing battle against the inevitable, destined to transform from a living city into a kind of submerged museum, a modern-day Atlantis whose beauty is preserved only in its slow surrender to the sea? But the slow surrender to water is a visible, measurable crisis. In Centralia, Pennsylvania, the danger is almost entirely hidden, a ghost that haunts the ground itself. Here, the instability is not erosion or flooding, but a relentless fire burning deep beneath the streets. It began in 1962, when a routine cleanup of a town landfill ignited a vein of exposed coal. The intention was harmless, but the result was catastrophic. The fire crawled into the abandoned coal mines that spiderweb beneath the town, finding an endless fuel source in the very bedrock that had once brought the community prosperity. For years, the problem simmered unnoticed, a secret inferno slowly expanding its territory. Then the signs became impossible to ignore. The ground grew warm, then hot to the touch. Dead, gray smoke began to curl from fissures that opened without warning in backyards and along the roads. The air took on a sulfurous smell, a constant reminder of the poison leaking from below. The most terrifying realization was that the fire was unstoppable. Attempts to dig it out or smother it failed, as the flames simply found new paths through the labyrinth of old mine shafts. The ground was no longer solid, it was the lid on a furnace. By the 1980s, the true peril became undeniable when a sinkhole nearly swallowed a young boy, opening up beneath his feet from the intense heat. That was the beginning of the end. The government bought out the remaining residents, condemning the town. Today, Centralia is a skeleton. Where houses once stood, there are only overgrown lots crisscrossed by a grid of crumbling streets. The fire still burns, and experts estimate it has enough coal to fuel it for another 250 years. It is a stark, sobering monument to the long-term consequences of an industrial accident, a place where the Earth's own energy turned against the people who tried to harness it, creating an instability that will outlive everyone who once called it home. While Centralia's fire burns in secret, the peril facing the Italian town of Civita di Bagnoregio is breathtakingly visible for all to see. Known locally as Il Piece Ci Muore, or the Dying Town, it sits completely isolated atop a dramatic pinnacle of crumbling volcanic tufa rock, connected to the world and its neighboring village by only a single, long footbridge. This is not a town slowly sinking or burning from within, but one that is being meticulously carved away by the elements, its foundations shrinking with every passing storm. The entire landscape tells a story of relentless erosion, with deep, stark gullies known as calanchi cutting through the soft clay surrounding the plateau, making the town appear like a majestic ship sailing on a petrified sea of badlands. For centuries, earthquakes and landslides have steadily whittled away at the cliffs, causing entire neighborhoods to simply slide off the edge and vanish into the valley below. The town's main piazza, which once stood at the community's heart, is now gone, a casualty of a massive collapse in the 17th century. This left the remaining cluster of medieval stone buildings clinging to an ever-narrowing island in the sky. Today, only a handful of residents remain, their lives defined by this profound isolation. Every grocery run, every visitor, every piece of mail requires a journey across that bridge, a powerful symbol of their fragile link to the 21st century. Yet, this very precariousness has become the town's salvation in an unexpected way. The dramatic beauty of a community suspended between earth and sky now draws a constant stream of tourists, whose visits provide the economic lifeblood needed for preservation efforts. Engineers work tirelessly to reinforce the cliffs with drainage systems and anchors, fighting a continuous battle against the landslides that threaten the last of the plateau. To live in Civita di Bagnoregio is to embrace a life of profound contradiction, where the very forces destroying the town are also the reason for its survival. It is a poignant reminder that sometimes the edge of instability is not just a place of danger, but also one of breathtaking and deeply fragile beauty. The fragility of a town built on rock or isolated by a chasm is one thing, but the slow, consuming hunger of the sea is another. On the eastern coast of England, the village of Happisburgh presents a starkly different kind of countdown, one measured not in centuries but in years. Its cliffs, composed of soft clay, sand, and gravel left behind by ancient glaciers, offer little resistance to the relentless assault of the North Sea. These are not solid rock faces but fragile, crumbly walls that surrender land at an alarming rate, sometimes several yards vanishing in a single storm. For the residents, this is not a distant geological theory but a tangible, creeping reality. Gardens that once held summer barbecues now end in a sheer drop. Roads that once led to neighbors' houses simply disappear into thin air, their painted lines tracing a path off the edge and into the churning water below. The community's response has been a painful lesson in practical triage. The government made a difficult and, to many, a devastating decision to stop investing in major new sea defenses for Happisburgh. The cost of holding back the ocean here was deemed too great, effectively designating the village as no longer defensible. This policy of managed realignment or coastal managed retreat means accepting that this land will be surrendered to the sea. For homeowners, this was a sentence delivered in bureaucratic language, stripping their properties of value and condemning them to a wait for the inevitable. The debate over this strategy is fierce and deeply personal. Is it a cold but necessary acceptance of natural forces, or an abandonment of a community that has existed for generations? There are no easy answers, only the grim mathematics of limited resources. Living in Happisburgh means accepting an expiration date dictated by nature. Residents speak of a strange duality to life, of normalcy punctuated by profound loss. Children play in yards that are a little smaller each year, and families celebrate holidays in homes they know are temporary. There is a powerful, defiant spirit here, a refusal to be defined solely by their vanishing coastline. Yet every storm brings a fresh wave of anxiety, the sound of the waves a constant reminder of the fragile pact they have with the land. The story of Happisburgh is a preview of a future that may await countless other coastal communities, a sobering look at what happens when the map must be redrawn, not by cartographers but by the sea itself. The slow, patient hunger of the sea is a predictable force compared to the sudden, violent release of energy that defines life in the Himalayas. Kathmandu is a city cradled in a geological vise, where the very act of the Indian subcontinent slamming into Asia continues to push the mountains a little higher each year. This immense pressure builds along fault lines deep underground, storing energy that must eventually be released. For the ancient city of Kathmandu, this means existence is punctuated by the ever-present threat of a catastrophic earthquake. The tremor that struck in April 2015 was not an anomaly but a grim reminder of a fundamental truth. The ground here is not a stable foundation, but a spring being coiled ever tighter. The disaster exposed a unique and terrifying vulnerability. The valley floor beneath Kathmandu is composed of deep, soft lakebed sediments. When seismic waves from an earthquake pass through this soft ground, they amplify, shaking the city with far greater force than the surrounding hills. It is like setting a bowl of jelly on a table and then shaking the table. The jelly wobbles with an intensity the wood itself does not feel. This liquefaction effect turned streets into rivers of sand and caused buildings to tilt and sink, not just collapse. The human cost was immense, with thousands of lives lost and countless more displaced. But the tragedy also struck at the city's soul. Its historic Durbar squares, where intricately carved wooden temples, some centuries old, were reduced to piles of brick and timber in moments. These structures, built with traditional Nueri craftsmanship, were marvels of engineering for their time, designed to sway with minor tremors. Yet they were utterly overwhelmed by the ferocity of the 2015 quake. The disaster sparked a painful and complex race against time. How do you rebuild a living museum while preparing for the next inevitable tremor? The challenge is a profound balancing act between honoring centuries-old architectural traditions and incorporating modern seismic safety. For every temple painstakingly reconstructed using the original methods and materials, there is a new building going up with reinforced concrete and steel frames, often creating a jarring visual contrast in the city's historic heart. The effort extends beyond monuments to the densely packed neighborhoods where the majority of Kathmandu's residents live. Here, the informal, rapid construction that accommodated a booming population often bypassed building codes, creating a cityscape of extreme vulnerability. The ongoing work to retrofit these buildings to strengthen them without displacing the communities within is a monumental task. It is a race fueled by the chilling knowledge that the tectonic plates have not stopped moving. The pressure continues to build, and the question is not if another major earthquake will strike, but when. The people of Kathmandu live with this certainty, rebuilding their magnificent city on a foundation that they know can turn against them at any moment. At the foot of Mount Niragango, the city of Goma lies under a permanent shadow of smoke and fire. This is not a slow, creeping danger like coastal erosion, but a volatile and immediate threat from one of the world's most active and dangerous volcanoes. The mountain is not a distant peak, it is a constant presence, its plume of gas a visible reminder of the liquid rock churning just below the surface. The relationship between the city and the volcano is one of terrifying intimacy. The ground Goma is built upon is literally hardened lava from past eruptions, a stark landscape of black rock that still feels warm in places. For the people who live here, the primary threat is not the explosive peak of the volcano, but the fissures that can tear open without warning on the city's very streets, releasing fast-moving rivers of incandescent lava. This exact scenario has played out with devastating regularity. In 2002, a massive eruption sent lava flows slicing through the heart of Goma, destroying 40% of the city, burying entire neighborhoods, and displacing hundreds of thousands of people. The lava moved with shocking speed, consuming houses, schools, and roads, leaving a fresh layer of black rock in its wake. Yet, even more astonishing than the destruction is the fact that people returned and rebuilt directly on top of the cooled lava flows. This decision is not born from ignorance of the risk, but from a brutal lack of alternatives. Goma is situated in a region plagued by protracted conflict and extreme poverty. For many, the volcano's slope represents a precarious form of stability compared to the man-made dangers found elsewhere. There is simply nowhere else to go. The city continues to swell with refugees and displaced persons, pushing its boundaries ever closer to the volcano's flanks. This creates an impossible dilemma, a collision of geological hazard and human desperation. Early warning systems are in place, but they offer little comfort when an evacuation route leads into a conflict zone. The resilience of Goma's people is both awe-inspiring and heartbreaking, a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure even when the very earth beneath their feet is a ticking time bomb. Their existence poses a profound question. What does safety mean when every possible choice carries a mortal risk? Far from the fiery slopes of volcanoes, a different kind of void is opening up in the Ural Mountains. The industrial city of Berezniki, Russia, is not being consumed by fire or water, but is quite literally falling into the earth. Here, the ground does not simply crack or shift, it vanishes entirely, creating some of the largest and most terrifying sinkholes on the planet. The cause of this collapse lies deep underground, in the labyrinth of tunnels left behind by decades of potash mining. Potash, a key ingredient in fertilizer, was the city's reason for being, the source of its wealth and identity. But when the mines were abandoned, the pumps that kept groundwater out were shut off. Water slowly began to seep back in, dissolving the vast salt pillars that were all that supported the cavernous spaces beneath the city. It is a slow-motion demolition on a geological scale. The result is not one, but a series of colossal pits, each one a staggering monument to instability. The first and largest, known simply as the crater, appeared in 2006. It is over 400 meters long, 350 meters wide, and deep enough to swallow a 40-story building. It consumed a factory, railway lines, and major roads without a moment's notice. These are not quiet collapses. The ground groans and rumbles for days before giving way, a terrifying symphony of subterranean failure. For the 150,000 residents, life is a constant exercise in cartographic anxiety. The map of the city is perpetually outdated as new danger zones are cordoned off and evacuation plans are rewritten. The very geography of their home is in flux, with safe routes to work or school potentially rendered impassable overnight. The response has been as monumental as the problem itself. Engineers have attempted to stabilize the ground by filling the underground cavities with a special gravel mixture, a desperate attempt to plug the voids. They have even diverted a river that was exacerbating the dissolution process, but these are containment measures, not solutions. The process of collapse is now self-sustaining, a chain reaction that experts believe could continue for decades. Berezniki stands as a stark lesson in the long-term cost of extraction, a place where the pursuit of earthly riches has fundamentally undermined the earth itself, leaving a community to navigate a landscape that is actively and violently eating itself. The slow, consuming hunger of the desert presents a threat of an entirely different scale. In the legendary city of Timbuktu, Mali, the instability does not arrive with a sudden crack or a river of fire, but on the wind as a silent, creeping tide of sand. The Sahara Desert, the largest hot desert on Earth, is on the move, and its dunes are steadily advancing upon one of history's greatest centers of learning and culture. For centuries, Timbuktu was a crossroads, a vibrant oasis where salt from the north met gold from the south, and where scholars gathered in its ancient universities. Today, the very sands that once defined its trade routes now threaten to bury it. This process is desertification, a transformation of fertile or usable land into desert, typically from climate change, drought, or unsustainable human activities. In Timbuktu's case, it is a combination of all three. Rising temperatures and shifting rainfall patterns have dried out the fragile Sahel ecosystem that once held the desert at bay, while overgrazing and the cutting of trees for fuel have stripped away the vegetation that anchored the soil. The result is an ever-expanding sea of sand that swallows roads, surrounds houses, and piles up against the walls of the city's iconic mud brick structures. These buildings, including the revered Jingraba, Sankor, and Sidi Yahya mosques, are themselves made from the earth. Their sun-dried earthen bricks are a testament to local ingenuity, providing cool interiors in the blistering heat. But they are profoundly vulnerable to their advancing cousin, the desert sand. A single major sandstorm can deposit enough material to block doorways and obscure entire walls, while the abrasive wind constantly scours and wears away at their intricate facades. The fight to preserve Timbuktu is a race against the sands of time, a manual, labor-intensive battle fought with shovels and buckets. After each storm, communities must dig out their homes and monuments, a Sisyphean task that repeats with the seasons. Preservationists are not just clearing sand, they are also working to reinforce the ancient building techniques, adding stabilizers to the mud plaster and improving drainage to protect the fragile foundations from even the rare, but increasingly intense, rains that can dissolve the walls into slurry. The struggle here is not against a single catastrophic event, but against a gradual, suffocating embrace. It raises a haunting question: can a city whose identity is so deeply rooted in the desert be saved from the desert itself? The preservation of Timbuktu is about more than just saving old buildings. It is about safeguarding the physical memory of a civilization, ensuring that the libraries which once held hundreds of thousands of manuscripts do not become mere legends buried beneath the dunes. The creeping sands of the Sahara present a slow-motion crisis, but for the Inupiat community of Shishmaref, Alaska, the land is vanishing with shocking speed. This small village sits on a narrow barrier island in the Chukchi Sea, a place where generations have lived in harmony with the Arctic environment. Now, that environment is turning against them with a ferocity that leaves little room for argument. The very ground they stand on is melting and washing away. The foundation of their island is permafrost, ground that has remained frozen for thousands of years, acting like a cement that holds the sand and soil together. As global temperatures rise, this permafrost is thawing, turning solid earth into a soft, unstable mush. At the same time, the protective sea ice that forms along the coast melts earlier in the spring and forms later in the fall. This ice historically acted as a natural buffer, absorbing the energy of powerful autumn storms. Without it, the full force of the waves crashes directly against the now vulnerable shoreline. The result is catastrophic erosion. Houses that have stood for decades are now perched on the edge of crumbling cliffs. Some have already tumbled into the sea, their contents scattered by the waves. The community has tried to fight back, installing seawalls and moving the most threatened buildings inland, but these are temporary fixes against an overwhelming force. The painful reality has become impossible to ignore. In 2016, the residents of Shishmaref held a vote and made an agonizing decision. 89% chose to relocate the entire village to the mainland. This is not simply moving houses, it is the deliberate, heartbreaking uprooting of a culture. The connection to this land is woven into every aspect of life, from the hunting grounds on the sea ice to the burial sites of ancestors. Relocation means more than losing a view. It means severing a spiritual and historical link that stretches back for centuries. The process itself is a logistical and financial nightmare, with cost estimates stretching into the hundreds of millions of dollars for a community of just a few hundred people. There is no established government program or funding source for such an undertaking, so the people of Shishmaref remain in a devastating limbo, living on a shrinking island while planning for a future on an unfamiliar shore, becoming some of the world's first climate refugees. Their story is a powerful and sobering preview of a choice that may soon confront countless coastal communities worldwide. Mexico City is sinking into the past, its towering skyline built upon the ghost of a lake. The Aztecs founded their city of Tenochtitlan on an island in Lake Texcoco, a brilliant defensive move that has become a modern geological curse. When Spanish conquistadors drained the lake centuries ago, they could not have foreseen the consequence of building a metropolis on the soft, waterlogged clay of a former lakebed. This clay, known as the highly compressible lake sediments, acts like a giant sponge. For decades, the city pumped water from the aquifers deep beneath this sponge to quench the thirst of its millions of residents. As the water was extracted, the clay particles compressed and settled, causing the entire city to sink. The rate is not uniform. Some neighborhoods have subsided by more than 30 feet over the last century, creating a lopsided urban landscape. This subsidence is not a slow, gentle settling. It is a violent distortion. You can see its effects everywhere, in the tilting monuments of the historic center, in the steps that have sunk halfway into the ground, and in the pipes and streets that buckle under the relentless pressure. But the sinking ground is only half the danger. When an earthquake strikes, the soft lakebed soil performs a terrifying trick. It amplifies the seismic waves, shaking with much greater intensity than the surrounding bedrock. The devastating earthquake of 1985 was a horrific demonstration of this phenomenon. The quake's epicenter was hundreds of miles away on the Pacific coast, yet the waves traveled through the earth and were magnified as they hit the soft clay beneath Mexico City, causing buildings to sway and collapse as if they were at the very center of the tremor. The city is engaged in a constant, monumental engineering battle to stay afloat. Injecting water back into the aquifers is one strategy, an attempt to re-inflate the sponge and slow the sinking. Engineers are also developing new building techniques, using flexible foundations and shock-absorbing technologies to help structures withstand the amplified shaking. The challenge is almost unimaginable. How do you stabilize one of the world's largest cities when its very foundation is a shrinking, shaking sponge? Every new building is a gamble against the unstable memory of the lake that refuses to be forgotten. High on the plateau of Andalusia, the town of Ronda appears as if carved by the gods themselves. Its most famous landmark, the Puente Nuevo, or New Bridge, is a breathtaking feat of 18th century engineering that spans the El Tojo Gorge, a chasm over 300 feet deep. The bridge does not merely connect two sides of a town, it stitches together the very edges of a geological wound, with the Guadalvin River a thin, silver thread far below. For visitors, the view from the bridge is a dizzying spectacle, a postcard come to life, but for the town itself, the gorge is both its defining beauty and its fundamental vulnerability. The cliffs that form this dramatic canyon are composed of soft, sedimentary rock, constantly under attack by wind, rain, and the freeze-thaw cycle that prizes stones loose with the changing seasons. Rockfalls are not a remote possibility, but a regular occurrence, a reminder that the ground beneath the picturesque whitewashed houses is in a state of perpetual decay. The very act of millions of tourists visiting each year to admire the view adds to the strain, their footsteps and the vibrations from buses and cars subtly stressing the fragile cliff edges. Preservation here is a continuous, high-stakes balancing act. Engineers conduct meticulous surveys, identifying fissures and installing nearly invisible rock bolts and mesh netting to hold precarious sections in place. It is a constant battle against gravity, fought with modern technology to protect the historic stonework of an ancient town. The community faces a profound dilemma. Its economic survival depends on the tourism that the dramatic landscape attracts, yet that very influx of people accelerates the natural processes threatening the landscape. To live in Ronda is to accept a beautiful paradox where the town's greatest asset is also its most persistent enemy. The bridge stands not just as a symbol of connection, but as a monument to this fragile equilibrium, a human structure daring to span a void that nature is always working to widen. The paradox of building on a sinking lakebed is a slow, grinding crisis, but high in the Andes, the danger is stored as freezing water, waiting for a single, catastrophic release. The city of Huaraz, Peru, lies directly beneath a sword of Damocles forged not of metal, but of ice and rock. Its threat comes from the towering Cordillera Blanca, home to some of the world's most tropical glaciers. These rivers of ice are not static, they are dynamic and, in a warming world, profoundly unstable. As they melt at an accelerating pace, they retreat up the mountainsides, leaving behind deep, new lakes cradled in the bowls they carved over millennia. These are glacial lakes, and their beauty is deeply deceptive. They are held back only by natural dams called moraines, which are essentially loose piles of rock and debris pushed aside by the glacier's advance. These dams were never engineered for permanence. They are fragile, porous, and saturated with the very meltwater they are supposed to contain. The science behind the threat is terrifyingly simple. A large chunk of ice breaking off from the remaining glacier, a landslide triggered by an earthquake, or simply the increasing pressure of the rising water can cause a moraine dam to fail. When it does not merely leak, it bursts. The result is a glacial lake outburst flood, a Spanish acronym known as a GLOF. In an instant, a colossal wall of water, ice, boulders, and mud is unleashed, thundering down the steep mountain valleys with unimaginable force. It is a blender of destruction, scouring the landscape down to bedrock and gaining momentum with every foot it descends. For Huaraz, nestled in the valley below, the memory of one such event is etched into its history. In 1941, an outburst flood from Lake Palcacocha killed an estimated 7,000 people, wiping out a third of the city in minutes. The scar of that disaster is a permanent part of the city's geography and its collective memory. Today, the threat is even greater. Climate change has dramatically increased the volume of water in nearby lakes like Palcacocha, making them larger and more unstable than they were 8 decades ago. The response has been a remarkable fusion of ancient knowledge and cutting-edge technology. Scientists and engineers constantly monitor the lakes with satellite imagery, drones, and sensors that measure water levels and seismic activity in real time. They have also undertaken the dangerous work of siphoning water from the most threatening lakes, lowering their levels manually to reduce the pressure on the moraine dams. Perhaps most critically, an intricate early warning system has been installed. A network of alarms connected to sensors along the potential flood path gives the residents of Huaraz precious minutes to evacuate to higher ground. Sirens are tested regularly and evacuation routes are marked, making preparedness a part of daily life. This vigilance is a testament to human ingenuity in the face of a volatile planet, a race to outsmart a catastrophe that could be triggered by a single falling rock or a distant tremor. The people of Huaraz live with a constant awareness of the mountain above, a reminder that the water that gives them life can also, in a moment of geological fury, take it all away. But the sword hanging over Huaraz is made of ice and water, a force of nature that can be monitored and to some extent managed. The instability that consumed Pripyat was invisible, odorless, and utterly silent. This was not a town brought down by a landslide or an earthquake, but by a single, catastrophic failure of human technology. The city of Pripyat, built to house the workers of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, was a model Soviet community, a vibrant and modern home for nearly 50,000 people. Its instability was not in the ground beneath it, but in the air, a radiological poison released in the early hours of April 26, 1986. The explosion at reactor number 4 did not just destroy a building, it ripped open the heart of the atom itself, scattering radioactive isotopes like cesium-137, and strontium-90 across the city and the surrounding countryside. The evacuation was swift and absolute. Residents were told they would be gone for 3 days, a temporary measure. They left behind meals on tables, children's toys on floors, and the entire apparatus of a functioning 20th century life. They never returned. The crumbling of Pripyat is not one of collapsing structures, at least not at first. It is a decay of a different order, a freeze frame of a moment in time, now slowly being unpicked by nature. Concrete apartment blocks, once symbols of progress, stand empty, their windows like blind eyes. A Ferris wheel, never ridden, rusts in an abandoned amusement park. School classrooms are filled with decaying textbooks and the eerie silence of lessons interrupted forever. The primary force of destruction here is not a violent geological event, but the slow, relentless patience of the natural world. Trees sprout through cracked pavement, vines climb up walls, and forests encroach upon the city limits. This is nature's reclamation, but it is a sinister version. Every leaf, every animal, every inch of soil is contaminated. The radiation has created a bizarre paradox, an exclusion zone where wildlife thrives in the absence of humans, yet every creature carries a hidden poison within. The real instability in Pripyat is time itself. The half-life of the radioactive elements means this threat will persist for centuries, far longer than any building will stand. The city is a monument to a different kind of peril, one where the ground itself is not the enemy, but the very particles that make up the world become the agent of destruction. It is a chilling reminder that the most profound instabilities are not always those we can see crumbling around us. The silent decay of a city, poisoned from within, stands in stark contrast to the visible, crashing violence faced by a community on the other side of the world. In the small island village of Ileño in the Philippines, the enemy arrives with the roar of the wind and the hammering of the waves. Here, homes are not just near the ocean, they are perched directly above it, clinging to the very edge of crumbling limestone cliffs. These cliffs, carved over millennia by the sea, are now surrendering at an alarming pace. For the families of Ileño, the evidence of instability is not a scientific chart but the view from their front doors, where the blue water creeps closer with each passing storm season. Their response is a breathtaking display of practical ingenuity. When the ground beneath a house begins to vanish, the solution is not to abandon it, but to extend it skyward. They build stilts not just a few feet high, but towering lattices of bamboo and wood that descend through the air to find purchase on whatever solid ground remains far below. A home that once stood firmly on the earth may end up balanced on a precarious wooden scaffold, a testament to a refusal to let go. This is not a temporary fix, but a way of life, an endless cycle of adaptation. The stilts themselves must be constantly maintained and reinforced, a battle against both the corrosive salt air and the immense force of the typhoons that grow more intense each year. These superstorms, supercharged by warmer ocean waters, deliver a 1-2 punch. Their ferocious winds tear at the structures above, while the colossal waves they generate chew relentlessly at the fragile cliff base. A single storm can carve away several feet of rock, undermining the already delicate foundation of an entire neighborhood. The loss is measured in increments, a slow-motion disaster that is both predictable and unstoppable. A footpath used for generations suddenly ends in a jagged precipice. A coconut tree that once provided shade and food tilts at a drunken angle before crashing into the surf. The community's resilience is born from a profound connection to the sea, which is both their tormentor and their provider. They are subsistence fishermen, and the ocean is their pantry. This creates a painful paradox. Their survival depends on the very element that is destroying their homes. There are no government buyouts or managed retreat plans here, only the hard work of rebuilding and reinforcing season after season. To live in Ilenio is to accept a life in suspension, both physically and emotionally, constantly balancing the need for safety with the deep, unbreakable ties to the only home they have ever known. The ghost of industry haunts the Ukrainian town of Solotvino in the form of gaping wounds in the earth. Like its Russian counterpart Berezniki, this community is being consumed by the voids left behind by its own prosperity. But here the story takes a uniquely sinister turn. For over 2 centuries, Solotvino was a company town, its identity and economy built entirely around the vast network of salt mines tunneled deep beneath its streets. When the mines were abandoned in the years following the Soviet Union's collapse, the pumps that kept groundwater at bay were switched off. Water began its slow, patient invasion, dissolving the very salt pillars that propped up the underground chambers. The result is a landscape that appears to have been bombarded from within. Enormous sinkholes, some hundreds of feet across and equally deep, have opened without warning, swallowing sections of roads, power lines, and farmland. The largest of these craters filled with water, creating an eerily blue but lethally salty lake. The comparison with Berezniki is stark. While both towns suffer from the same fundamental process of dissolution and collapse, the response and the human consequence have been vastly different. Berezniki, a much larger city, has mobilized significant, though desperate, engineering efforts to manage its crisis. In Solotvino, a smaller and more isolated community, the collapse has been met with a haunting inertia. There is no massive gravel-filling operation here, only a slow exodus and the grim acceptance of a condemned landscape. The ground does not just collapse, it groans and shifts for days beforehand, a subterranean warning that residents have learned to heed. This creates a bizarre patchwork of habitation, where one street might be relatively stable while the next is a cordoned-off danger zone sinking by inches each year. The air itself carries a constant, faint taste of salt, a pervasive reminder of the dissolving world below. The story of Solotvino underscores a chilling reality of the post-industrial age, where the legacy of extraction can outlive the industry itself by centuries, leaving communities to live on top of a geological hourglass that is rapidly running out of sand. The silence of a poisoned city gives way to the roaring wind of the high Alps. In the Austrian village of Goltua, the threat does not rise from the ground but descends from the mountains with the speed of a freight train. Nestled in a narrow valley at an altitude of over 5,000 feet, this picturesque community has always lived with the knowledge that the snow-covered peaks above are both its protector and its potential executioner. That delicate balance was shattered on a February afternoon in 1999. A series of massive avalanches thundered down from the surrounding slopes. One of them, a wall of snow and ice, traveled nearly 200 miles per hour and slammed into the village with unimaginable force. It was not a gentle blanket of white, but a concrete-like mass that obliterated everything in its path, killing 31 people in one of the deadliest avalanche disasters in Alpine history. The tragedy was a brutal lesson in the physics of snow. The danger had built up over weeks, with heavy snowfall followed by strong winds that deposited enormous cornices on the mountain ridges. A sudden rise in temperature acted as the final trigger, releasing a slab avalanche of catastrophic proportions. In the aftermath, the entire approach to living in the Alps had to be rethought. Goltua became a living laboratory for the most advanced avalanche defense systems in the world. The response was not just bigger walls, but a multi-layered strategy of deflection and disruption. Engineers constructed colossal deflection dams on the valley floor, angled structures designed to split an oncoming avalanche and channel its destructive energy away from the village center. Higher up the slopes, they built massive terraces and snow nets to stabilize the snowpack and prevent large slabs from forming in the first place. Perhaps most critically, they refined a sophisticated early warning system that combines weather monitoring, radar, and constant patrols to close roads and trigger controlled explosions before the mountains can release their fury unexpectedly. To walk through Goltur today is to see a community that has reconciled itself with its environment through technology. The defenses are not hidden. They are a stark, modern feature of the ancient landscape, a testament to the human determination to stay rooted in a place of profound beauty and equally profound danger. The village stands as a powerful example of mitigation, a place where the edge of instability is now guarded by a wall of human ingenuity. New Orleans is a city built on a paradox, a masterpiece of engineering that is now engineering its own demise. Known as the Crescent City for its curve along the Mississippi River, its very existence is a defiance of nature. The ground it sits upon is a river delta, a landscape meant to be soft, wet, and constantly replenished by the silt carried down from the continent. For generations, the solution to flooding was simple: build the walls higher. A monumental system of levees and floodwalls was constructed to hold back the mighty Mississippi and block the surge of hurricanes from the Gulf of Mexico. But this fortress mentality created a devastating feedback loop. By channeling the river so perfectly within its walls, the levees prevented the annual spring floods that once deposited layers of rich sediment across the delta. This sediment was the lifeblood of the surrounding wetlands, the spongy, grassy buffer that absorbed storm energy and provided a first line of defense. Starved of this vital material, the wetlands began to sink and dissolve, a process called subsidence, while the open water of the Gulf advanced. At the same time, the city itself, built on that soft delta mud, is naturally sinking. Now add the global phenomenon of rising sea levels, and you have a perfect storm of sinking land and rising water. The result is a city that finds itself in a deepening bowl, with some neighborhoods now sitting several feet below sea level. The disaster of Hurricane Katrina was a horrific demonstration of this vulnerability, where the failure of the very levees meant to protect the city led to catastrophic flooding. In the aftermath, the strategy had to change from simply holding back water to a far more complex and ambitious goal: rebuilding the land itself. Engineers are now working on monumental projects to divert sediment from the Mississippi River back into the dying wetlands, attempting to mimic nature's own land-building processes. They are creating controlled crevices in the levees and building pipelines to pump slurry into the open water, desperately trying to grow new marshland. It is a race against time, an attempt to reweave the natural fabric that was torn apart by centuries of human intervention. The future of New Orleans hinges on this delicate balance, a question of whether human ingenuity can now work with nature rather than against it to save a city that should never have been built in the first place. Even the most formidable stone eventually yields to the persistent whisper of the wind. Deep within the desert canyons of Jordan, the legendary city of Petra endures not as a ruin, but as a monument in the midst of a slow, graceful dissolution. The Nabateans, masters of trade and hydraulics, did not build their city from stone. They sculpted it directly from the living rock, creating breathtaking facades like the treasury and the monastery from towering walls of rose-red sandstone. This stone, while beautiful, is inherently fragile, a sedimentary rock held together by a natural mineral cement that is vulnerable to a trio of relentless enemies. Water is the primary sculptor, even in the arid desert. Rare but powerful rainstorms seep into cracks, and when the temperature drops at night, this water freezes and expands, prying the rock apart from within in a process known as freeze-thaw weathering. Then there is salt. As groundwater evaporates from the rock face, it leaves behind crystallized salt. These crystals grow inside the stone's microscopic pores, exerting immense pressure that causes the surface to flake and crumble, a disease conservators call sanding. Finally, the region is seismically active, and even a minor earthquake can send vibrations through the cliffs, destabilizing already weakened structures. The very act of admiring Petra accelerates its decay. The breath and body heat of thousands of daily visitors alters the microclimate within the narrow Sick, the canyon entrance, increasing humidity and encouraging salt crystallization. The constant vibration from footsteps and tour buses mimics the subtle tremors of an earthquake, steadily shaking the foundations of these ancient wonders. The work of preservation here is a race against time fought with delicate tools. Conservators use syringes to inject fragile cracks with special grouts that match the original stone's flexibility. They clean surfaces not with harsh chemicals, but with poultices of cellulose and distilled water, gently drawing out damaging salts. Every intervention is a calculated risk, an attempt to strengthen the stone without altering its majestic appearance or accelerating the very processes they seek to halt. The goal is not to stop the erosion, an impossible task, but to manage its pace, to ensure that the rose-red city does not fade from human memory before its time. The silent, graceful decay of sandstone stands in stark opposition to the violent upheaval occurring in the far north. In the Siberian city of Norilsk, the ground itself is turning to mush. This is one of the northernmost cities on Earth, a place built with immense effort directly atop a foundation that was supposed to be permanent, the continuous permafrost. For decades, this frozen ground provided a solid, rock-like base for the city's heavy industrial buildings and sprawling infrastructure, but that permanence was an illusion. As the Arctic warms at more than twice the global average rate, the permafrost is thawing, and the city is quite literally losing its footing. The consequences are visible on almost every street. Apartment blocks designed for stability on frozen earth now tilt at surreal angles, their foundations buckling as the ice that once bound the soil together melts away. The ground sags and buckles, creating bizarre, rolling landscapes where there were once flat streets. This is not a slow, gentle settling, but a chaotic and destructive process. The most critical failures, however, are often hidden from view. Beneath the city, pipelines carrying water, heating, and industrial chemicals are being wrenched apart by the shifting ground. A rupture can mean a sudden loss of heat in the brutal Arctic winter, or, even more catastrophically, an environmental disaster as toxic substances leak into the newly thawed soil and waterways. The very pipes that were buried deep in the permafrost for stability are now being crushed by it. Engineers face a nearly impossible task. How do you stabilize a building when the definition of solid ground is changing beneath it? Some solutions are as colossal as the problem itself. For critical structures, they drill thermal siphons or cooling pipes deep into the ground. These devices work like refrigerators, actively pumping heat out of the soil to refreeze the permafrost and create an artificial, stable foundation. It is a desperate attempt to air condition the very earth, a testament to the extreme measures required. But this is an energy-intensive and incredibly expensive process, one that can only be applied to a handful of the most important buildings. For the rest of the city, the thaw continues unabated. The story of Norilsk is a powerful and unsettling preview of a future that awaits much of the Arctic, a stark demonstration that the most profound instabilities can begin not with a dramatic collapse, but with a silent, invisible drip of meltwater. The silent, invisible thawing of the Arctic permafrost is a world away from the palpable, sulfuric breath of Volcano. Here, on this small island off the coast of Sicily, the danger is not hidden but omnipresent, a constant companion in the very air the residents breathe. The entire island is the peak of an active volcano, and life here is a negotiation with the mountain's simmering temper. The most immediate sign of this is not lava but gas. Fumaroles, vents in the Earth's crust, dot the landscape, hissing and steaming as they release plumes of sulfur dioxide and carbon dioxide. The smell is unmistakable, the sharp, rotten egg odor of sulfur that permeates everything, a permanent reminder of the forces sleeping below. For the island's small community, this is simply the backdrop to daily life. They have built their homes, their cafes, and their livelihoods in the shadow of the Grand Crater, the main crater that looms over the island. The ground itself can be warm to the touch, and in certain areas the soil heats enough to bake food, a curious perk of living on a geological hotspot. But this proximity comes with a deadly serious side. Gas levels are monitored constantly, as a shift in the wind or a change in volcanic activity can cause invisible, odorless carbon dioxide to pool in low-lying areas, creating lethal pockets where the oxygen is simply displaced. There is no dramatic countdown here, only a steady, vigilant awareness. The decision to live on Volcano is often a family tradition, a deep-rooted connection to a place of stark beauty and therapeutic hot springs that outweighs the perceived risk. It is a life lived with a quiet acceptance of a fundamental truth, that the ground beneath their feet is not just land, but the thin, brittle crust atop a chamber of incandescent rock. Their resilience is a quiet one, found in the routines of checking gas monitors and knowing which paths to avoid after a rain, a daily dance with a planet that is very much alive. The ground in Port-au-Prince is not merely unstable, it is exhausted. This city has been shaken apart and pieced back together so many times that the very soil seems to hold a memory of trauma. The threat here is seismic, born from the Enriquillo Plantain Garden fault line that runs like a scar beneath the island of Hispaniola. But the true catastrophe is not written solely in the movement of tectonic plates. It is amplified by the desperate circumstances of the people living above them. When a major earthquake strikes, as it did with devastating force in 2010, the destruction is not just a function of magnitude, but of vulnerability. The city is a dense tapestry of informal settlements, where concrete block homes are often built without reinforcement, rising story by story as families grow, with little regard for engineering codes that are rarely enforced. These structures become death traps when the ground begins to roll. The geology itself conspires against the city. Much of Port-au-Prince is built on a basin of soft sediments that amplify seismic waves, turning a strong quake into a city-wide convulsion. This combination of poverty, weak governance, and unforgiving geography creates a perfect storm of risk. Rebuilding is a Herculean task, a race against the next disaster. Efforts to construct more resilient buildings are often outpaced by the urgent need for shelter, leading to the same precarious construction methods being used again. The cycle feels inescapable. How do you plan for an earthquake-resistant future when the present is defined by the struggle for daily survival? The story of Port-au-Prince is a stark lesson in how a natural hazard is transformed into a human disaster, where the instability of the earth is tragically mirrored by the instability of society. The slow, relentless sinking of a delta city is a crisis of both water and will. In Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh, the very geography that gave it life now threatens to drown it. This is one of the most densely populated cities on the planet, a teeming metropolis where every inch of land is contested. Its explosive growth has pushed its boundaries outward, consuming the low-lying floodplains that once acted as natural sponges for the mighty rivers that converge here. These seasonal wetlands were the city's safety valve, absorbing the annual monsoon deluges. Now they are paved over with concrete, replaced by a vast, impermeable surface that channels the water directly into the streets. The city's fate is caught in a deadly pincer movement. From above, climate change is intensifying the monsoon rains, delivering more water in shorter, more violent bursts. From the sides, the rivers swell, their levels raised by rising seas that push saltwater inland, and from below, a more insidious problem is unfolding. To supply its millions of residents, the city has pumped enormous volumes of water from the aquifers deep underground. As this water is removed, the layers of clay and silt compress, causing the entire city to sink lower, a phenomenon known as subsidence. So Dhaka is quite literally descending at the very moment the water around it is climbing. The result is a chronic, debilitating state of flooding. During the rainy season, entire neighborhoods can be submerged for weeks, turning roads into canals and stranding communities. The floodwater is not clean. It is a toxic soup mixed with sewage and industrial waste, leading to outbreaks of disease. The economic cost is staggering, with businesses shuttered and livelihoods washed away year after year. The response is a constant, exhausting cycle of reaction rather than prevention. The city has built embankments and pumps, but these are often overwhelmed. The deeper challenge is one of planning and equity. The poorest residents are invariably pushed into the most vulnerable areas, the lowest-lying lands on the city's periphery, where they build makeshift homes on ground that is the first to flood and the last to dry. Their resilience is a testament to human endurance, but it is a brutal, unequal burden. The story of Dhaka is a stark preview of the urban future for countless coastal and riverine cities, a complex puzzle where the pressures of poverty, population growth, and a changing climate converge on a landscape that is simply running out of room to absorb the shock. Krakov's empty streets cling to a stark pinnacle of clay and sandstone, a skeleton of a town where the only residents are the wind and the shifting earth. Unlike the managed retreat of Happisburgh or the defiant stilts of Ilenio, this medieval village represents a complete and total surrender. Its story is one of a slow, inexorable squeeze where the ground beneath it simply lost the will to hold. For centuries, its strategic hilltop location offered protection from invaders and a commanding view of the surrounding farmland. But that very height, built on layers of unstable clay and sand, became its undoing. A series of landslides triggered by poor drainage, agricultural expansion, and severe weather in the mid-20th century began to systematically undermine the town's foundations. Houses did not just crack, they were wrenched from their moorings as entire sections of the hillside slid away. The church bell tower, once the proud center of community life, now tilts at a perilous angle, a frozen monument to the moment the earth moved. The final evacuation was not a single dramatic event, but a gradual, heartbreaking exodus that stretched from the 1950s into the 1970s, as families were forced to abandon homes their ancestors had occupied for generations. They left behind everything, creating a perfect time capsule of mid-century Italian life that now sits in silent decay. Today, Krakow is not being fought for. There are no engineers installing drainage pipes or rock bolts. Instead, its crumbling beauty has found a strange second life as a film set for movies like the James Bond film A Quantum of Solace, where its haunting desolation stands in for a world undone. To walk through Krakow is to witness the ultimate power of geological forces. It is a place where the negotiation between human settlement and the land has ended, and the land has won. The town's silence speaks volumes, asking us one final, profound question. When the ground itself becomes the adversary, is there a point where resilience must yield to respect and preservation means letting go? From the silent decay of poisoned cities to the roaring collapse of mining towns, a universal truth emerges from these 24 stories. Despite their vastly different geographies, these communities are bound together by a shared human experience of confronting an unstable Earth. The patterns that connect a sinking delta to a burning coal seam reveal profound lessons about our relationship with the planet. One of the most consistent challenges is the immense difficulty of governance and funding. How does a local government, or even a national one, allocate limited resources to fight a threat that may not materialize for a generation? The story of Happisburgh's managed retreat versus Venice's multi-billion-dollar Mesa gates illustrates this painful triage. There is no single right answer, only a series of agonizing choices between defending the indefensible and abandoning ancestral homes. This leads directly to the psychological dimension of life on the edge. The residents of these places are not defined by fear, but by a profound form of resilience. It is a resilience born from necessity, a daily practice of normalization where the extraordinary threat of a lava flow or a sinkhole becomes part of the ordinary background of life. This acceptance is not surrender, but a strategy for survival. It allows a fisherman in Ilenio to mend his nets while the cliff below his house crumbles, and a family in Goma to send their children to school in the shadow of an active volcano. This psychological fortitude is the invisible infrastructure that holds these towns together, often proving more durable than the concrete and steel meant to protect them. Underpinning many of these modern crises is the accelerating force of climate change. It acts as a threat multiplier, intensifying existing instabilities to a breaking point. The permafrost thaw in Shishmaref and Norilsk, the rising seas menacing Dhaka and New Orleans, and the intensified storms eroding the cliffs of Ilenio all share a common driver. Climate change is not a new type of instability, but it is dramatically shortening the timelines for action. Processes that once unfolded over centuries are now compressed into decades, forcing communities and governments to make impossible decisions with unprecedented speed. The creeping danger has become a sprint. Ultimately, the story of these crumbling towns is a reflection of our own species' ambition and adaptability. We have always sought out the edge, drawn by resources, security, or simply the space to be free. The crumbling ground is the price of that ambition, a reminder that our settlements are not permanent features on the planet, but temporary arrangements in a continuous geological conversation. The great lesson is not that we should never build in dangerous places, but that we must do so with humility, with a clear-eyed understanding of the risks, and with a commitment to adapt when the ground inevitably begins to shift. From the silent decay of poisoned cities to the roaring collapse of mining towns, a universal truth emerges from these 24 stories. Despite their vastly different geographies, these communities are bound together by a shared human experience of confronting an unstable Earth. The patterns that connect a sinking delta to a burning coal seam reveal profound lessons about our relationship with the planet. One of the most consistent challenges is the immense difficulty of governance and funding. How does a local government, or even a national one, allocate limited resources to fight a threat that may not materialize for a generation? The story of Happisburgh's managed retreat versus Venice's multi-billion-dollar Mesa gates illustrates this painful triage. There is no single right answer, only a series of agonizing choices between defending the indefensible and abandoning ancestral homes. This leads directly to the psychological dimension of life on the edge. The residents of these places are not defined by fear, but by a profound form of resilience. It is a resilience born from necessity, a daily practice of normalization where the extraordinary threat of a lava flow or a sinkhole becomes part of the ordinary background of life. This acceptance is not surrender, but a strategy for survival. It allows a fisherman in Ilenio to mend his nets while the cliff below his house crumbles, and a family in Goma to send their children to school in the shadow of an active volcano. This psychological fortitude is the invisible infrastructure that holds these towns together, often proving more durable than the concrete and steel meant to protect them. Underpinning many of these modern crises is the accelerating force of climate change. It acts as a threat multiplier, intensifying existing instabilities to a breaking point. The permafrost thaw in Shishmaref and Norilsk, the rising seas menacing Dhaka and New Orleans, and the intensified storms eroding the cliffs of Ilenio all share a common driver. Climate change is not a new type of instability, but it is dramatically shortening the timelines for action. Processes that once unfolded over centuries are now compressed into decades, forcing communities and governments to make impossible decisions with unprecedented speed. The creeping danger has become a sprint. Ultimately, the story of these crumbling towns is a reflection of our own species' ambition and adaptability. We have always sought out the edge, drawn by resources, security, or simply the space to be free. The crumbling ground is the price of that ambition, a reminder that our settlements are not permanent features on the planet, but temporary arrangements in a continuous geological conversation. The great lesson is not that we should never build in dangerous places, but that we must do so with humility, with a clear-eyed understanding of the risks, and with a commitment to adapt when the ground inevitably begins to shift. These stories of towns on the brink reveal a world in constant, dynamic conversation with the people who call it home. If this journey across crumbling cliffs and sinking streets has captivated you, we would love to hear your thoughts. Let us know in the comments which of these unstable locations you would be most curious to witness for yourself, or if you know of another community living with a similar geological challenge. Your engagement helps us continue exploring the most fascinating corners of our planet. For more deep dives into historical mysteries and the powerful forces that shape our world, be sure to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell. Our next adventure is just around the corner.